Going live. I'll just show you the building as it is, the existing building, which I'm sure you all know. So that's the elevation fronting Lower Street. And you'll see here the existing trees, which are referenced in the report. That's the Midway elevation. You can see the Midway car park there to the left of the photo. Another one of the other end of the building fronting the Midway, and another one just at the side of the building adjacent to the roundabout, again showing the substantial tree coverage. So the application, this is the lower ground floor. Because of the difference in levels between Lower Street and the Midway, there's the lower ground floor, which is what you can see here. It's not very clear, apologies, but I'll just describe what the various elements are. So this is a bike store here. There's 2 community rooms, there's a gym. All the plant is to be within the building at this point here.
With respect, Chair, it's not a very good setup, is it? We can't see what's there. I can see just a faint line. I've paid a fortune for these glasses. I still can't see it.
I think Councillor Williams has a point, Mr. Chairman, and I can see the screen from here, but I can see why colleagues to my right might well find this remarkably difficult to see. I don't know if we can move that screen, but then if we touch the electronics, maybe it will all go horribly and hideously wrong. But I do understand Councillor Williams's concerns.
Thanks for your comments, councillors. This is something we can, hopefully it'll come up on the screen here. If not, that's something that we need to address moving forward. Perhaps have the camera situated there, but the screen's perhaps in front of colleagues so they can get a good look at it.
Do you want me to wait a moment and see if it?
Yeah.
Ah, right, okay. Right, so yeah, that was the lower ground floor, and then the upper ground floor. So this is the Midway entrance here. So that will be the principal entrance into the building, and on this floor it's all residential accommodation, except for here is the bin store. And then there are a number of floors, but this is just an example of one of the floors, which all follow the same sort of pattern. So the area over to the left here in green is one of the cluster flats. So you've got 6 bedrooms and then the communal kitchen and living space there. And then the others are all self-contained studios. So this is the elevation fronting Lower Street. So the existing building is 5 stories and this lower ground floor area. So the existing building goes to this point with plant on the top at the moment. And so 3 additional floors are proposed. That's the elevation fronting the Midway. So you can see there the main entrance feature into the building. And that's the side elevation fronting Church Street. So that's an image of what the building would look like. So that's the Lower Street elevation, but obviously looks different in when it's drawn like that, rather than it's a CGI rather than a plan drawing. So there's various hard and soft landscaping proposed around the building. There's taking advantage of the difference in levels. There's an outdoor area here with a pergola, outdoor seating areas, pathways, and the majority of the trees are to be retained. So certainly the very substantial ones that you could see in the photo, they are all to be retained. And I think there's 4 trees to be removed, but then additional landscaping to be put in. That's showing the hard landscaping. So that's the sitting out area, the pergola there with seating within that. So as part of the application, they've submitted a townscape and landscape visual impact assessment. And these are the views that they have assessed the building from. So there's 20 viewpoints there that were agreed with officers prior to submission of the application. So officers have considered carefully those viewpoints, and I'm not going to show them all now. We can look at those later during the discussion if members wish. But your officer's view is that they're not going to, that the extension to the building isn't going to have any significant impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area or of the listed building here, which is St. Giles's Church, 2-star listed building. So that's it. Thank you.
Thanks for that, Rachel. Can I just ask that the indicative drawings of the CGI, is that based on accurate dimensions in terms of height?
It is, yes.
Thank you. Have Mr. Collins online. Jeff, any words?
We have an attendee that's waiting. The name is displaying as Debbie NC Architecture. I don't know if that's Mr. Collins.
Okay, let that one in, please.
Okay. I've just promoted them to come in.
Thank you. Mr. Collins, do we have you online?
Hello.
Mr. Collins?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can indeed.
Right, okay. I'm going to invite you to speak now. You have 3 minutes, which to address the planning committee. After 2 minutes, the officer to my right will remind you. So would you like to go ahead now, please?
Thank you very much, I will. Good evening. Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Neil Collins. My practice designed the changes proposed to Morstan House, which are before you this evening. I'm pleased to have the opportunity to speak in support of the proposed development. The property is a typical example of a 1960s concrete framed office building, clad in facing brick with uniformity of window openings as befits the office use within. It is, as we architects say, a building of its time. These buildings are classed in the genre of monumentalism, you might say bleak, which is why the scheme we've proposed takes us away from the rather dire imagery to renovate the building and highlight its better attributes. To projecting brick double columns, which is quite an unusual detail, extending them upwards, which seeks to break up the massing, renewing the glazed openings, adding the step floors in contrasting materials, all to revitalise and revigorate the facade, seeking to create a modern, sleek built form for the student community as our clients are looking to rebrand the residence. The applicant's team has worked closely with officers to agree the design, has also undertaken a public consultation exercise before submitting. We believe the proposal has got the broad support from local businesses and residents alike. No neighbour objections have been submitted, and we do hope that members, like others in the town, are supportive. St. Giles Church will retain its setting and appearance as a prominent heritage building and will continue to contribute towards the town centre skyline. Historic England have considered the proposal and have also not raised any objections. The proposal fits within the council's adopted policy for the town centre, being regenerated with quality living accommodation, better facilities and a safer and more attractive environment. Given the police have been called out regularly, given the antisocial behaviour attracted by this empty building, this will be greatly mitigated should you support the officer's recommendation and grant permission.
1 minute.
Thank you. The committee report describes how the scheme meets with national planning policy, local planning policy, and with identified material considerations. It will create employment in construction, provide valuable, much needed student accommodation, and when operational, will generate full and part-time jobs. The officer report recommends minded to approve, subject to conditions and a Section 106 contribution, which has been agreed. I respectfully ask the committee to support this application, and thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Collins, for your presentation. That ends your input for this evening. You can, of course, watch online. Before I go over to members, could I ask if the consideration of this planning application has been made in terms of the character, form and historical vistas of Newcastle? With that in mind?
Yes, that was one of the main considerations of your officers, and is discussed in detail within the officer report. We considered the impact on the character and appearance of the conservation area and the setting of the Grade 2 star listed St Giles's Church. The NPPF requires us to, first of all, consider whether we believe there to be substantial harm to those assets or less than substantial harm. Your officer's view is that because there wouldn't be any direct harm to the listed building, and there would be no impact on any designed view, that it would be less than substantial harm. And then in considering whether to approve something that is considered to be less than substantial harm, the NPPF requires us to consider the public benefits of the scheme and whether they outweigh what harm that there is, what less than substantial harm that there is. So you'll see within the report that there's an assessment of the public benefits of the scheme, and we've considered that against the less than substantial harm, and your officer's view is that the scheme is acceptable.
Thank you very much for that. I think some members may have further lines of inquiry on that one. So I'll now throw it over to members for debate. Thank you. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I thought I saw Councillor Fear's microphone blink on before me. But if he's happy for me to speak first, I'm happy to speak first. I have got some grave reservations about this, Chair, potentially insuperable ones. I have to say, we have been here before with high rise at the edge of the town centre. I believe that the Met still benefits from a resolution of this committee permitting the occupation of that monstrosity by non-students for the purpose that it was never suitable and has never been fully occupied for the intended occupants. I don't think we have to vote in favour of ugly, unnecessary, high-rise trash on the edge of our town centre, on the edge of our market town centre, our conservation area. And I don't think I will be voting for this application. If it passes, it will be doing so without my support. But if I could ask two specific questions or to make two avenues of inquiry. The first would be to say, could we please have a look at the visual impact assessment? We've seen, our officer showed us in the presentation where those viewpoints were. And having looked at the viewpoints, from about half of them, you can't see anything at all. And that's fantastic, because if a building is hidden behind another building, it can't possibly be impacting the visual amenity. But from the areas that it can be seen, I think some of those photographs and some of those comparisons will show just how disruptive to the skyline the proposed building will be. And I feel that we should take some time to look at that and to evaluate that visual impact. The second thing I'd like to draw other members' attention to are the comments of the waste management section, which seem to have been roundly ignored. They've been copied and pasted into the officer's report for us this evening, but it says the situation proposed is regrettable, and the number of bins proposed, the space provided for the refuse collections, is inadequate. And all we have is a sort of, not a promise, but a suggestion that they will engage a private provider, the operators of this facility will engage a private provider to do weekly bin collections, but that's not addressed in the report. I mean, we're not in the business of approving slums, and it seems to me that waste collection is a very, very basic thing that we've got to ensure is made right, particularly for a building that's going to be occupied by so many people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. Councillor Fear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to say that I agree with what Councillor Holland has said. He's taken some of the comments away that I was going to raise, such as the waste management ones, which are very important. Waste management isn't a very fashionable thing, but nonetheless, we've got to get this right. Other things that worry me about this are, again, like Councillor Holland, the size and massing of this building. I am not at all convinced that, and again, if I wandered down there today again, and I tried to put in my mind's eye 3 extra stories. Now we're talking about a 5-story building, so we're almost putting half as much again on top of this building, and we are very close to St Giles. I think that this has a dominant and overbearing effect on one of the major heritage assets of our town centre. I am also concerned by the size, because in the past, we've tried very hard to break down the canyon type effect that we've got on Lower Street, breaking the town centre from the rest of the town. This is going to push these things in the wrong direction. So I think that there again, we've got very strong reasons to think about this. And if you were to wander down Lower Street from either direction, quite frankly, I think we would find that this was, as I say, creating this canyon effect, becoming a very, very overbearing building in that regard. Another thing that I think we really ought to think about, I mean, I noticed that we talk about a bicycle store at the bottom. Let's live in the 21st century. These pieces of accommodation are designed for students. When I was a student, and that's longer ago than I care to remember, I can only remember one of my friends who had a motor car. Nowadays, virtually all students have a motor car. Where are that extra 3 stories of parking going? And if we don't address that now, we are doing a major disservice to our town. So like Councillor Holland, I am very worried about the scale, the massing of this building. I'm worried about what it will do to the conservation area. I'm very, very worried about what it will do to St Giles. And I also want to know where the cars are going.
Thank you, Councillor Fear. Councillor John Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to agree with the last 2 speakers. It come down to, it's over intensification on that site. But could I ask the question, are these proposed flats or whatever you want to call them, all en suite?
Sorry, yes, they are all en suite.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
That's sad. But again, over intensification on that side comes to mind. And the last 2 speakers really have covered what I was going to say, but I could add a few more. Pepper Street runs from the Cenotaph down to Midway. And if this building is allowed to go up, it will completely darken. It's like walking to a brick wall. We're trying to encourage small businesses into the town, and Pepper Street is one of the old streets going right back to the market town of Newcastle, market university town of Newcastle, and it will detract from that setting where businesses are trying to really suffering, but it'd be like walking into a brick wall as you walk down Pepper Street. Another point, as the officer describes Midway, is quite negative. Well, the Midway where Morton House is quite tidy. Where we let ourselves down is along by the Midway car park, entrance to the car park with bird poo. It's absolutely disgusting. And we expect people to come out of the car park, walk along and use the town centre and use this facility that's proposed to be built. So, you know, let's get our own house in order. Let's get it set out right. So the midway is not too bad as it is. But again, if this building is allowed, it will be over intensification. And we haven't gotten any views. We used to take photographs from the Pool Dam, the old Pool Dam pub, looking at St. Giles Church and coming across to the right to this proposed building to give us some idea. And what height are the buildings against St. Giles Church? So Lou, we haven't got that information. But again, I think it's over intensification on this particular site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Before we go on to the next person speaking, may I interject at this point and offer some photographs of the comparisons? Would that be appropriate?
Well, yeah, we do have the information. And as I said in the presentation, we've got those viewpoints available to go through, and I can show you those now. Just on the waste issue, we haven't ignored what the waste management section is saying. We sought additional details from sought confirmation really from the developer as to how it would be operated. And it's going to be operated by a building management company who operate equivalent facilities elsewhere. And that based on experience of student accommodation, weekly bin collections are considered much better operationally, rather than having a significant number of bins being stored on site and emptied less frequently. So weekly removal is the most effective and efficient way of addressing those needs, and will allow effective management and operation of the bin store, which in turn will help secure better recycling rates. They've addressed in their experience, based on experience with student developments elsewhere, the capacity of storage that they consider is necessary. And they've formally confirmed that these waste storage and removal arrangements through this management company will be sufficient. So yeah, we have sought confirmation from them, and that's how it's to be dealt with. If I just go on now to show you these viewpoints, so just bear with me, I'll just share the screen. So that's the map that I showed you earlier, showing the various viewpoints. There's a lot in here, but I'll scroll through them all. So that's down from that's at the Belong development, which shows that at that point the building won't be visible, or the increase in height of the building.
Mr. Chairman, it doesn't, does it? Because I mean, we're given no indication of what the height was there. We've just got a photograph of what's there now. How can we tell how high the development's going to be?
No, there's an as existing photo, and there's an as with the building photo, and the building isn't visible in that one, which shows that it's not going to be visible. Whereas on this one, there's the existing viewpoint, that's with the building. So that's the view down Church Street. So yes, at that point you would see the additional height there. That's from the Rycroft. The red outline there is the location of the building, but it wouldn't be visible above the existing buildings. So this is, I think, the one that perhaps Councillor Williams was talking about. So that's the viewpoint at the moment along Pepper Street, and that is what the proposed building would look like in that view. So that's from High Street, and yeah, the red outline, so you wouldn't see the building above the existing buildings from High Street. So you can see there's the existing plant just visible on top of the building, and that's the view how it would appear with the building, well with the extension to the building. So this is down Merial Street, well, from the top of Merial Street down Church Street. So yeah, you can see the additional height of the building there. And again, further back from Merial Street with York Place just here to the side. So it's not visible in that view. So this is St. Giles's Church, visible at that point. So there'll be reference made to that in the discussion. Not visible in this viewpoint. Further out of the town here, really. I think it's just there, just slightly visible above the existing buildings. Again, there very slightly. Not visible in that building. So again, there's St. Giles's Church. So along from the Travel Lodge, looking down towards past the Unitarian building and St. Giles's Church. So still significantly higher, and in officers' view, it doesn't compete with the prominence of the listed building. So just slightly visible there, adjacent to the Belong building. So these are from Poolfields direction, looking back towards, so you can see St. Giles's Church there. Obviously, the current view at that point is of the telephone exchange building and Morstan House there with the plant just showing there. So that's the additional height there, is those 3 stories. So at that point, the additional 3 stories are visible. And you can just see it there behind those trees. And I think we're nearly there. So this is the view from opposite Aldi. So you can see the existing buildings, the Midway, and the proposed extension there, visible above Aldi. And this is obviously right within the town centre outside NatWest. You can see the Met and the building wouldn't be visible from there. So that's all of the viewpoints that we've got. I do also have a cross section that I think members will find helpful if you just bear with me. Trying to, where's the not that what I'm doing. Yeah. So you can see there the building as it is. and the relationship there with Keel House at the other end of the Midway, at the roundabout opposite the View Cinema, the Met that's been referred to, the former Savoy building, the Midway car park, Morstan House as it is, and St Giles's Church. So got the additional 3 stories on there. Still a significant gap between that building and St Giles's Church. It doesn't compete with that building in terms of its height. It's lower than the Met, but obviously the views do vary with the topography of the town centre. But yeah, hopefully that's useful, so you can reference the height in relation to the existing buildings.
Cool. Have we got any? Have you got any comments concerning the question raised by Councillor Fear in terms of the heritage? Okay.
Hi everyone. I don't often come here, so I'm the conservation officer for those of you who don't know me. I think I just wanted to clarify when you think about heritage assets, obviously to start by describing the significance of those assets, and that has been done in the heritage statement. If some of you have perused the documents that have been included with this development. So once you've assessed the significance of the heritage asset, and I think we've all sort of generally agreed probably in the room that and between us all that the main assets are the St Giles's Church, Grade 2 Star listed building, and the conservation area, which is an asset in itself. So there's no direct impact on the listed church. We're more looking at indirect impact on setting. And then equally, when we're talking about the conservation area, arguably there's a direct impact to the character and appearance of the conservation area. So there's those sort of difference in potential impacts. And then when we're talking about setting, I think it's important to understand that what that means is how the asset is experienced. So within the context of the town centre conservation area, the context is the town centre, which is an ever changing environment through the decades, through the centuries, and particularly this part of the conservation area has been identified in the conservation area appraisal sort of some 10 years ago or so, but the character hasn't changed that much. But we're looking at the Midway section, which has got the 60s buildings adjacent to the ring road, etc. And I think we'd still feel, even with that context, that St Giles's Church still embraces that kind of topography. It sits on the hill, it's got dominance on the skyline, so it still kind of enjoys that dominance from many different views around the town centre. And I think, given the context of the town centre, the church can accommodate a certain degree of change as well. So that's where I've come to the view that I think it still retains that dominance, and it's fundamentally its significance and what makes that building special and part of the town centre won't change with that increase in height. We've got obviously a strong urban character, and again especially in that part of the conservation area, and that is really what in essence the development will continue. Because don't forget, it's just an increase in height. The building itself isn't been taken down and rebuilt, and so in another form it retains its form. And I think the landscape, as Rachel's pointed out on that corner, is very significant tree coverage there, and again that helps to soften that environment, and the development in itself will enliven, certainly at ground floor level. I also want to talk about those visual impacts, because I think, you know, we look at the visual impact in a static form, and you know, you're never just stood there. Views are always about movement as well. So you move around the town centre, you take in different views, you take in glimpses, you take in the gable ends, you take in the chimneys and that context, and you'll still be able to do that and experience that as you wander around the town. Sometimes you'll be going fast around the ring road in a car, maybe sometimes you'll be walking, but these views aren't static. So you have to kind of, I think about that and think, will the church still be dominant in that skyline? Will you still understand what makes it significant?
Thank you, Mrs. Wallace. Before we go on to the debate, I wonder, Councillor Fear, are you happy with that question, or do you want to come back on it?
There are a variety of things I'd like to come back on. I mean, first of all, of course, planting a tree at the bottom of the building has no effect whatsoever on the increase the height at the top. We're not talking about trees that go right to the very top. So it's neither here nor there at the end of the day. I thank the officers very much for the viewpoints and indeed the line drawing at the end. I mean, the line drawing at the end showed to me that, in my mind anyway, that this rampart-like effect was substantially increased by the increase in height on that building. I was heartened to see that the building cannot be seen from areas of the town centre where I rather suspected it might have been sort of popping over the Roebuck and such like. Nonetheless, I still think that were one to walk down Lower Street, this proposed extension would very much detract from the church on the corner. So I remain unconvinced that this would not, in fact, have a very detrimental effect in that way. The one thing I would like to raise, Mr. Chairman, once again, is that, you know, there are lots of extra people going in on these 3 stories. After all, 8 to 5, it's quite a big increase. Where are the cars going to go?
Thank you. Next, we have Councillor Jill Williams, followed by Councillor Gorton and Councillor Crisp.
I'd just like to ask the officer what she meant by when she said we have put the public benefits regarding this building. I don't see any benefit to anybody on this particular building. I have to agree with all our speakers, actually. And for a conservation officer to actually say that it won't detract from the town, I'm sorry, but I think it's time we had another look.
Williams. Councillor Gordon.
Chair, I think I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Williams. I must say, I came to the meeting having some doubts about the impact of the proposed development on the skyline. And my goodness, I think my doubts really have certainly been echoed very prominently by previous speakers. One thing I did struggle with actually looking through the report and the associated documents is I couldn't actually discover the actual height of the building. Perhaps that was just me, but there are a couple of other issues that I think need to be explored other than the impact on the skyline. And Councillor Fear has already mentioned parking. And from the report, we seem to be in a situation where the officer's saying, well, if no parking is provided, therefore students won't turn up with cars and we won't have a problem. Yeah, honestly, I wish that was the case. But for a number of years, I worked for Staffordshire University and I retired 5 years ago, so I had no professional connection with the university. But I can remember various estate managers had that same sort of policy in mind. And they thought, right, we take away car spaces, therefore the students won't come onto campus with cars. But it didn't work. And there were all sorts of problems with students parking on College Road and Leek Road. So Councillor Fear has already asked this question, where will the cars go? My experience would be, actually, you can make this sort of precept, but it's very difficult to get people to actually follow it. The other thing I noticed from the application is there's one, have I got this right, one short stay loading bay. And that's, I presume, for all deliveries and pick up and drop offs. And there was reference to that happening at the start and end of terms. Fair enough. But as I understand it, this building is going to be mainly occupied by students. And I think anybody who knows about the online ordering habits of students, we're going to have a lot of deliveries turning up there a lot of the time. And I do wonder whether one short stay loading bay is going to actually be adequate. And the final question that I really do think that needs to be asked really is about the cladding and the safety of the cladding, and whether we can be given assurances, given what has happened nationally, whether the cladding the officers feel is right and safe. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Gordon. Councillor Crisp.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, initially in the documents, it didn't look that big, and I think it might benefit from seeing the pictures again, zoomed in. It's a bit like looking at a postage stamp from back here. But even at that small size, it does look a lot bigger than I actually initially thought. I mean, I think it probably will give very nice views of Newcastle to whoever gets allocated a top floor apartment, but. And I think it's what students as well. It's not just that the 100 of them that are going to be living in there, and perhaps maybe like a quarter of them might have cars, but they're also going to have a lot of friends visit them. They're live very active social lives. So I think you're going to have a lot of touring coming and cars parking and friends dropping off and all sorts of things. And I think there's a good point about the loading bay as well. You're thinking at the start of term time, you're going to have parents coming with cars filled up with suitcases and coming and going and stuff like that. So it does seem a lot of people living there with a lot of activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crisp. My personal view on this is that we've got to be very careful here in terms of as a planning authority. We look at uses of buildings. My worry is that if this is granted, have we not then got an over provision of student accommodation in Newcastle? And I think it will be indicative of us to consider that, to think we only saw recently how a developer made an application for change of use because the student provision wasn't met at that time. I'd be very mindful that this, given the number of rooms that there is in this development, that this doesn't become low-grade housing right bang in the centre of the town. Obviously, you can't prove that, but it's a consideration in the round in terms of the other buildings and applications that have been passed in recent history and have yet to be built out. What will be the cumulative impact of all this? And I think we need to take that into consideration as well when deliberating on this application. So I'm getting a bit of, oh, okay. And then John Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I broadly agree with a lot of the comments that have been made, but also I think there needs to be a little bit of balance here and look at some of the, that building exists already. Something needs to happen in a positive way. Some of the other kind of positive things that we're aware of is actually bringing people to live in town centres has a really positive effect on reducing antisocial behaviour. Also, it could have a positive effect on local businesses in the town centre as well. So although I share the kind of concerns of the aesthetics and the impact on what we look like and feel like as a town centre, I wouldn't be willing to kind of pass this the way it stands, but I certainly don't think that we should just be kind of kicking it out totally. I think bringing people into the town centre bright young people, many of whom might stay and contribute to the well-being and future of the borough. Could be a good thing. I also think that, yeah, we know that they don't stay forever. They might need to have a look at a blend of the offer there as well. So on the aesthetic point and the size, I do share all of the concerns, but I also think that we just need to, one, acknowledge that that building is there and we need to be doing something positive with it. And there is a good shuttle from Keele and into Newcastle, and we would look at, I mean, I suppose if people do come to live there, then part of the contract would be that you know, it is not accommodation for people with cars. So I don't know, I'm putting that in for a bit of balance, really, not suggesting that we pass this at all at this point in time, but something needs to happen with the building, and actually there could be a positive outcome of having people resident in the town centre. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you for that, Councillor Moffat. Can I ask you if you're happy with the layout in terms of what's proposed here, and also the numbers in that particular spot?
Yeah, no, I think there is too much and it's too big. So I don't know the economics behind, you know, the proposed number of beds, as it were, and I certainly would like to see a reduction in those additional floors. And perhaps what we should be looking at, and I agree with other councillors' comments, perhaps it's about quality, not quantity here, but I know that has an economic impact on the developer.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat, for that clarity. I have Councillor Williams and Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to carry on from your conversation, your points, really, we go back when Keele University were going to expand, and they wanted 12,000, and got the figures right, students, and they're looking to expand in a big way with the science park and all the development, and they want accommodation for those students. Well, I do believe that they've dropped that figure now, and they realise that from different COVID and Brexit and a lot of other things, points that they're not going to achieve that. So they dropped it down with expectations down to not far where they were a few years ago. So really, the developers came in on the pretext of they're going to be a lot more, 4,000 more students. It's not going to happen. So, and to back that up, in the old Savoy building, they've come into planning, back to planning, to change the planning for non-students to take accommodation in them buildings. And so is Bristol Street Motors down on London Road, exactly the same. So my belief is that we're overextending the student accommodation. We want to work with the Keele. We want it to be, we've told ourselves, a market university town, but at what cost? It says, going back to the building, it says a block house. And when you're walking, I could see what the officers have worked very hard into getting around this planning application. But when you walk down the proper Pepper Street and turn to the right, St. Giles Church to the right, the existing Morton building is to the left, and there's not much difference. And when Morton House was built on derelict land, it was always a car park many, many years ago, they built it away from the setting of the Grade 2 listed building. So here we are years later, going to crunch in and put this blockhouse that detracts from that particular area. I take the views of the conservation officer, but I still feel it's over intensification on that site. Thank you.
Councillor Holland, do our officers wish to comment on any of those issues raised? Thank you.
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. number of questions there. I hope I've made a note of them all. Reference to, I think Councillor Jill Williams, you asked about the benefits that there are, the public benefits, and it is set out within the agenda report. The provision of, as Councillor Moffat has referred to, there's the provision of residential accommodation within a sustainable location, within a town centre location, and particularly the introduction of student accommodation into the area that would undoubtedly benefit the town centre in making it a more vibrant place, bringing people into the town centre and spending money. We have actually made reference in the report as well, in particular to improvements to the lower levels of the site. At the moment, on particularly from Lower Street, it's a particularly unattractive area at the bottom. As has been referred to, there's significant problems with antisocial behaviour, and this scheme is bringing in an attractive landscaped area onto Lower Street that would provide activity, give some natural surveillance, and in your officer's view would help to lift that area, which at the moment isn't a particularly attractive part of the conservation area. So they're the benefits that we're referring to within the report, those public benefits, which in our view are greater than the less than substantial harm that there would be to the assets of the conservation area and the setting of the listed building. Reference has been made to the safety of the cladding, but it's not a planning matter. It would be covered by building regulations, but I would imagine that it's something that the developers would be looking at very carefully and would be very much in the forefront of their minds. But yeah, it's not for consideration by under the planning application. Reference has been made to over provision of student accommodation. Again, that's not a material planning consideration. We are led by the applications that we receive. It's not for us to, which presumably are informed by the market, it's not for us to say that we consider that there is an over provision of student accommodation. So concerns have been expressed about the lack of parking. We're in a highly sustainable town centre location here. There's a very good bus service from the town centre to Keele and Staffs University. There is limited parking available to students at both universities, which I would imagine would influence students to leave any vehicle that they may have at home. But as has been mentioned, that this accommodation would presumably be let on the basis that there is no parking available. And importantly, there's a wide range of facilities and services within a very short distance of the site. So they can be accessed very easily on foot and or by bike, which there's a significant bike store proposed, or by bus. So all of these factors potentially would encourage students to not have a vehicle. But in particular, I would remind members of the decision at the Savoy, which members, we refused planning permission on a number of grounds, one of which was the lack of parking. And the appeal was allowed on the basis that the inspector agreed that the university's measures to discourage students from driving to campus and parking their vehicles would have some effect on discouraging students bringing their cars. And he acknowledged that while some students would still wish to use their own vehicles and may wish to park in unrestricted residential streets, he attached significant weight to insufficient evidence that the proposal would have a harmful effect on highway safety. And as with that scheme, the Highway Authority are not objecting to this scheme. They've highlighted the sustainable location of the site, and they've raised no objections on highway safety grounds. So if we were to refuse the application on those grounds, we potentially would be at risk of an award of costs against us if it went to an appeal, because it's not substantiated by any evidence from any technical consultees or any other such evidence. So yeah, I hope that answers your queries. If there's any more, you have to remind.
Very much for that. Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to our officers for their comments. I'm particularly grateful to the Conservation Officer for talking around thoughtfully around the views that have been expressed in the report and by the Conservation Advisory Working Party. It's still the case that in our officers' report, the almost the first words when we consider conservation and heritage are that it is a disappointment. It is disappointing, our officer tells us, that more hasn't been done to mitigate or ameliorate the original plans as were initially put in front of our officers for consideration. And yes, there has been a dialogue, a professional dialogue with our officers who have, I'm sure, done their utmost to make sure that what has come finally in front of us is acceptable and certainly in their view is acceptable. I said when I first spoke on this that we've been here before, and our officer is right to highlight our experience at the former Savoy, what is now the Met. But I have to say, I stand by the way I voted on that application when it came in front of us. The inspector is wrong. The inspector was wrong, and I would hope and expect of our officers that they would make a very strong representation in the event that a refusal tonight is voted through by the committee. Now, I am going to move refusal. I'd like us to take a little bit of time to formulate the heads under which we are refusing the application, because I am mindful that we need to be seen to be acting reasonably. And while I can come here and spat off and make emotionally charged comments about how I feel the application will impact on our town, we now need to be rational. We need to demonstrate that we've been so. Assuming that I've got enough members here who are willing to vote with me. So I'd like to start with visual amenity, and I think Councillor Fear probably put it best. The first head of refusal has got to be that it is overbearing by reason of its mass and its scale on the townscape. I think we've seen enough evidence in front of us tonight to justify that. And what I would say is that one of the unusual aspects of development on the edge of our town centre, because our conservation area is hemmed in with development already, is that it is often more visible the further away you get. Now, there are vantage points within the conservation area on which this will have a huge visual impact, but it also has an impact outside of the conservation area, because I know, and everybody who looks at the Met, let's take that as an example of the high rise that's currently blotting our landscape, you can see it much more clearly, much more visibly. It is much more dominant the further away you get, particularly from an elevated position. You can see that wretched thing everywhere. And the fact that if you stand outside our Guildhall in the most historic, most conservation-y bit of our conservation area, if you stand on the stones or if you stand outside the market and you look up at the clock of the Guildhall, you cannot see the Met. That is about the only place you can't see the wretched thing, because they designed it in a way that it is just slightly too short to be visible at that precise location. But I have a feeling that if you extrapolate what we've seen in terms of visual impact tonight, and you imagine how much worse that will be if you're standing outside the town centre looking in, that is wholly justified. It justifies us voting it down tonight. And I have to say, it is not acceptable to me. I don't believe that it is acceptable, and I wouldn't vote for it. So visual amenity would be one. In terms of the refuse collection, I have to challenge our officers and say, it's in the report in black and white. It is not secure. There is no promise there that there will be a weekly bin collection. And unless our officers can tell us that we can condition that, and we can apply a condition that says you must have weekly refuse collections, then I'm afraid we'll be looking at a situation where there is inadequate provision for the large number of students or occupants of this development. in terms of having their waste emptied. And that's an awful situation to be in. It's an awful situation to exist inside of our ring road. And I'm not sure that we would be doing ourselves any favors by voting it through without, at the very least, a very strictly worded condition to say that there has to be a weekly bin collection, because there are 19 spaces for residual waste provided, I think, and they need 32. And these are large hoppers, aren't they? They're the big ones, they're the big bins. So we really need to think carefully about that, and we need to think more carefully than we already have done. In terms of car parking, I understand again from our report that we have a saved policy, policy T17, which prevents the provision of private parking on new developments within the ring road. And I accept that. I've not read that policy myself, but perhaps our officers can outline it for us. I feel very strongly, though, that a failure, either by design in this application or through condition, to require the provision of disabled parking or access for disabled drivers, for visitors and residents who are disabled, is again a huge disservice. Car drivers may not exist. We may live in a reality where it is true that the university can 100% discourage people from bringing cars onto campus, but I'm afraid disabled people do. And I would certainly challenge the planning inspectorate, if they ever have a look at this at some point in the future, to tell us that there is no such thing as a disabled student driver. I think that's an absolutely appalling oversight, and that is in itself, I think, a reason for refusal. So while I would not refuse on highway grounds, because as we've heard from our officers, highway safety grounds are probably not going to fly, particularly when it comes to an appeal, I think that there should be parking provision. I think that we should think carefully about how people are going to access this site, how people who are going to live in a place are able to get to and from that place. And for people with mobility difficulties, that should be a paramount concern. So there are three things there. I don't know if anybody else wants to chip in with other things, but I've given 3 reasons why I think we should be voting that down. I'd like to move refusal on those grounds, Chair.
Colin, before we go on any further, can I just gauge the room in terms of, is there anyone who's minded to support the application as it is written? Okay, I see that as a negative. Resolution to refuse based on Councillor Holland's points there, and I think I've got most of them down there.
Could I say, Mr. Chairman, I think we do need a seconder, probably, don't we, formally, and I'm happy to second Councillor Holland's motion.
Yeah. Do we wish to leave it at that, or do we need to be more robust?
I fear that Councillor Holland is probably right about the highways. I think it's ridiculous. I work in the university sector. It would be nice for me to think that all my students did was go home at night and then went to the university and they spent all their nights in the library studying and then they went home again. But actually they don't. Students want to move around the area they're in. They don't simply want to go to the university, their place of residence, backwards and forwards. Surprising surprise, they often feel that having a motor car is the way to do that, so that they can go to football matches, pop concerts, visit places, friends or whatever. So it would be nice to try and live in the 21st century and not pretend that the motor car is this thing that simply takes you to your place of study and back. We will have cars. The construction of the Met, as Councillor Holland has pointed out, we lost that one, but surely at some point there is also an argument about incremental parking here. Not everybody who occupies the Met will be discouraged from having a motor car. That will be even more the case, and I worry that this is also will also be this, that as we move from a world of student accommodation to other forms of accommodation. And again, one of the sad things about these things is the way that we seemingly have to pick up the tab for developers' mistakes in that regard. Those people are even more likely to have motor cars. So the fact we've got the Met, the fact the Met was, that argument was rejected there, we are placing more and more pressure on very limited resources. I suspect it probably is wise not to press that. So unless Councillor Holland wishes to add that to his motion, I'm happy not to. But I do want to voice my frustration at, frankly, what is a very, very childish argument.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. We've been here before on the parking. I agree with Councillor Fear, but also that we wouldn't stand a chance with the present inspectorate, planning inspectorate, but where we can get around it, I do not know. But it's my belief that if it were to go to refusal, the officers would have to defend that decision. And whereas I'd agree with Councillor Holland, over-intensification or the words that he used, it's my belief, I might be wrong, that the officers will have to put muscle on that particular point. Am I right in saying that? When they have to, if it is refused, and the officers have to defend that decision. Thank you.
Mr. Upton, officers wish to respond to that. Rachel.
Yes, absolutely. Officers, of course, will put forward the best case possible to try and defend the council's reasons for refusal. But we need to be very clear at this stage as to what the specific concerns are. So, for example, when members have refused to, have referred to impact on visual amenity and overbearing impact on the townscape, are you specifically referring to impact on the conservation area and the listed building, i.e. the heritage assets, or are you talking more generally about visual impact on the character and appearance of the area, rather than specifically the harm to the heritage assets? Because if you're talking about harm to the heritage assets, we're required by the NPPF to, first of all, state whether we consider there to be substantial harm or less than substantial harm, which is what we've discussed earlier. So your officer's view would be that we would have to conclude that there is less than substantial harm. So if members were minded to agree with that there is less than substantial harm, we then are required to weigh that against the public benefits, which I outlined what officers consider those to be. So if members consider that there's less than substantial harm, you would then need to be, in my view, be saying that you don't believe that the public benefits outweigh that less than substantial harm. But that would be if you are referring to the harm to the heritage assets. But if you are talking more generally about visual amenity, then that wouldn't necessarily make any reference to the heritage assets, but we need to know specifically.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, absolutely correct that we nail it down and be specific. I think the answer to the officer's question is both. I'm thinking both in terms of what I would consider substantial harm within the conservation area. For example, we saw a view from Merrill Street, looking over the heads of what is a very historic building, the Butters John B estate agency, right over the top of that. You're looking at an extremely overbearing view. I think the view from Lower Street, it's probably just outside the conservation area, but looking in towards it, it is an extremely oppressive object that will be appearing in the skyline right next to the church. So I'm thinking of harm that I would characterize as substantial to the setting of the heritage asset. And I'm thinking of visual amenity within the conservation area, but I am also referring to the character and appearance of our town, because what I said earlier is that if you look from outside, if you're getting on one of the major routes into the town centre, I think these buildings and having a congregation of these buildings, we've already got the Met, it does have a visual impact, and that impact is deleterious, and it is affecting the way in which people approach our town. At the gateways to our market town, it is possible to see these buildings, and it will be possible to see this building. I could see our conservation officer might want to come in at this point, Chair.
Yeah, it's more just for clarification that obviously we're not saying that there's no harm. We're absolutely not saying there's no harm, but certainly when and this kind of debate about harm and less than substantial and substantial comes up in appeal situations, and inspectors are generally considering substantial harm to be direct impact on a physical asset in itself. So arguably you could say the conservation area, but or direct impact on a listed building in itself, i.e. demolition. And obviously it's a sliding scales from substantial to kind of less than substantial, but quite substantial. And then it's a really difficult concept to argue. And I think we just really need to be sure that we aren't saying that there's no harm. But then that's when the NPPF kicks in the public benefit side of things. And then the planning officer has to make that decision. So it's just what we consider substantial and less than substantial.
Thank you. And through you, Chair, I minded to agree. It's very sensible advice. I think the substantial harm to heritage assets is only engaged when we are talking about harm to the conservation area and to the listed building. If we are talking more generally about character and appearance, I feel that's something that members of the committee understand very well. It's something that we engage with when we're talking about planning within neighbourhoods. We know what the character and appearance of an area is. And I'm talking about the character appearance of our town, of our market town centre, which we enter and which we exit and which we interact with. So in that regard, I'm not looking to have an argument with anyone about substantial harm or where on a sliding scale this falls. I'm saying that in addition to what I consider fairly substantial harm from a heritage perspective, there is also the issue of character and appearance, and mass and scale and dominance of the skyline are something that apply across the board, whether we're talking about a housing development or an industrial development or a high rise like the one that's in front of us.
So I think then from that, what I believe members to be saying is that there's two aspects to that one reason for refusal. So I think you're of the view that it's less than substantial harm to the historic assets, but significant harm to the character and appearance of the town, and the issues that you talked about, the broader point really, the impact due to the scale and the massing at the gateway to the market town, etc. Is that correct?
At this point, can I just clarify something that may boil into two separate reasons, but just to see if I can get some sort of handle on this. Would Councillor Holland be okay with the first item of refusal, overbearance and harm by reason of massing, scale and design of the building, because the councillors have made reference to the fact that there's too many here. I think it's important that the design is also mentioned in that as a first point of refusal, and then bring in the one about the heritage side. That if we're in danger of amalgamating the two, I think there's boundaries there for exploitation of a counter argument.
A very sensible suggestion, Chair. Happy to go along with that and to boil it down into two distinct points there. And if our officers are comfortable with the way in which the Chair has phrased it, I'm happy to go along with that. One issue that I won't pursue desperately far, because I don't think it will fly necessarily, is we've heard a little bit about balancing harms against public benefit. I have to say that my assessment of the benefits of the proposed development diverge a little bit from our officers in the recommendation that's been made from us. We've heard from other members that there is some disagreement about quite how bad that part of the Midway is, whether or not the improvements that will be brought about by redeveloping and sticking several stories on top of the existing Morstan House building will create. But I remember when the NPPF was first published, and there was a huge amount of criticism that it talked a lot about sustainable development, but didn't define sustainable development. The latest version does, paragraph 7 of the MPPF as it currently exists, makes a stab at it by saying at a very high level, the objective of sustainable development can be summarized as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. And I suppose it's not a challenge to officers, but it's not a question either. How are we assessing the current need that we've got? I know in a response to what Councillor Moffat said, our officer's advice to us was, well, you can't say whether or not there is a need or no need for more student accommodation, but we have in a planning context previously considered, for example, saturation in terms of hot food takeaways, for example. It is possible for a market to be saturated, and it's possible for a planning committee, a planning authority to say that it is. And I genuinely, echoing the comments of other councillors who've spoken, I am not sure that this development is needed or necessary. It doesn't meet a need in the present, and what it might well do is store up problems for the future in terms of parking, in terms of amenity in our town centre, in terms of having another rotting monolith on the edge of our historic town. And I'm not sure that I can formulate that into a reason for objecting or refusing the application, but I feel it strongly, and I wonder if perhaps there are any other comments that people would like to make.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Question really. With our concerns on parking, I do agree. If we put that as if it is refused, we'll lose that to the planning inspectorate. But is there a way that we can put a rider that we are concerned with the developments and the rationale around it? Students don't have cars. Is there anything I can put in there that's not, if it is refused, actually a point on refusal, but we'll make the point that we are very, very concerned with the parking arrangements for students in the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. We're purely here, obviously, to try and distill down to a resolution for refusal. I would like to see a reference to inadequate provision for parking for disabled. I think under the Disabilities Act, I think that is a relevant item for refusal. I don't think we're being negligent or reckless in that regard. I think that should be said, that we expect provision for disabled people.
Yeah, I think on that point, my understanding is that members aren't looking to recommend refusal on the grounds of a highway safety concerns. But the issues that you've spoken about provision for disabled drivers and as well, I suppose, the refuse collection issue. My interpretation of that would perhaps be that we will be looking at a residential amenity issue, because if we're on the issue of parking, it would either be highway safety, which, yeah, I don't think that you're looking to go down that route, or I think the lack of spaces for disabled drivers would have to be that would be kind of an inconvenience for them, or more than an inconvenience, but an impact on their quality of life. So that's a residential amenity issue, I think. Is that what members are?
The lack of disabled access, parking, it's not about an inconvenience, but actually it's about, you know, in the 21st century, designing a space which isn't accessible and inclusive. And so, I mean, it's not just about an inconvenience. It's
Sorry,
actually
that was probably the wrong word. I think it's, but it's a quality of life issue, isn't it? So it's not a highway safety concern, because the lack of those parking spaces for disabled drivers wouldn't cause a highway safety issue, but it would cause them, it would affect their quality of life, make life difficult for them, which potentially is a residential amenity issue. Not wanting to put words in your mouth, but I'm just trying to obviously formulate a reason for refusal around the concerns that have been expressed.
Councillor Fear.
Thanks, Chairman. I'll be brief because I think we probably have had a good long debate on this side. Just a word of warning perhaps for Councillor Holland. I mean, it would seem to me injudicious to include in any motion the phrase less than substantial. It seems to me that if one does that, one concedes the point through the MPPF. I also don't agree at all with the idea that substantial harm is simply knocking down a building. Building something which is completely out of context to it, adjacent to it, seems to me to be substantial harm. So whether we want to put the word substantial in is an issue, but I think saying less than substantial, basically you've conceded the point before you've even started. So I will be very, very wary of doing that. I will support the councillor regardless, but I just throw that into the arena.
Councillor Holland.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Fear is correct as always. If I misexpressed myself, let me restate. The substantial harm in my mind occurs to the conservation area. It is substantial, and I've indicated, for example, the viewpoints where I feel that harm is felt most acutely. Our officers have given advice in relation to the heritage asset St Giles Church. Now, if members feel that the harm to the setting of the church is substantial and we should include it, then I would say so and we can include it. If not, I simply wouldn't mention it. I would say I'm talking about substantial harm to the conservation area and to the setting of the town centre. I wouldn't then go on to refer to the church unless people felt that it was substantial enough for us to include in our reasoning when it comes to officers to write up the decision.
Are we getting there? Have we got those points there?
Yes, substantial harm to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and then significant impact on the character and appearance of the town, and the reference to impact on due to the mass, scale, dominance, etc. design of the building. I don't know whether we reached a view on the lack of parking provision. Are we going?
Councillor Holland, are you sticking with the provision for disabled?
Yes, very much, but we make very clear that we're talking about provision for disabled people, both residents and visitors. So our officer is quite right. It is a matter of residential amenity, but it's not just the kind of residential amenity that we like to have. It's the kind that is essential and that our statute law provides for. It is an absolute necessity when we're building, particularly as many dwellings as we're expecting will be included in this proposed development. There has got to be proper consideration made of that, and whether our policy requires us not to have private spaces or not, there ought to be accessible parking close by, if not actually on site, and it is intimately entwined with creating these new student bedrooms that provision needs to exist, and the fact that it does not exist makes this whole thing unacceptable in my view. So yes, that's very much a head of objection, a reason for refusal in this case.
Thank you, Councillor Holland. And are you happy to keep in the insufficient provision for waste management?
I was going to ask officers if they hadn't answered the question, can we condition it? Because if it's something we could have conditioned, then it's not going to stand up at the inspectorate if an appeal is made. But I feel quite strongly that it's got to be something done there.
Okay, I think we're about there. So we've had the
yes, that's correct. It could be required by a condition, and therefore if it can be required by a condition, it would be unreasonable to use it as a reason for refusal. So okay,
accept that fully then.
Okay, right. We have a motion put forward for refusal by Councillor Holland. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fear. Thank you. All those in favour of refusal for the terms conditions proposed by Councillor Holland, will you please show your hands now? And I think that's unanimous. Thank you. Whew. So everyone isn't like that as long as that. Thank you, councillors, for your patience and sticking with that one to get a resolution through. I think that was the right thing to do in terms of circumstances. Okay. Lastly, we move on to, it isn't lastly, but the next item on the agenda, number 5, is land off Chemical Lane, Tunstall. Do we have a presentation?
We do, Chair. Yeah, sorry, just I'm in Morstan House mode at the moment. Just I'll share my screen. Right, so land off Chemical Lane. So planning permission was granted about 12 months ago for a distribution warehouse. The site, I haven't got a location plan on here, but the location plan with your agenda, it's at the end of Chemical Lane, the end where adjacent to the A500, where you come off it and go up to Tunstall. So planning permission was granted for the distribution warehouse and offices, and they're looking to vary 2 of the conditions, so condition 2 and condition 15. So condition 2 lists the approved plans, and they are wishing to make some elevational changes. The approved materials for the unit comprise vertical sheeting broken into 2 colours of grey and a blue. And this proposal removes the blue, or proposes to remove the blue, and includes an additional grey. So there'd be 3 shades of grey and an orange feature band. And the grey and with the orange feature band reflects the company's corporate business colours. I'll just show you those before we move on. So that's the approved elevations, and this is what they're looking to do now. So the addition of the orange banding and an additional colour grey with the removal of the blue. The building or construction of the building has actually commenced. So that's how it looks, and got another image to show you, which is a long distance view that they've provided, and that's the building there, which yeah, as you can see in the context of the existing buildings is similar in the colours and the design. So the other condition that they're looking to vary is condition 15, which required the implementation of a drainage scheme as set out in the approved documents. They've since amended the drainage design and provided revised drainage plans, which demonstrate a suitable surface water drainage strategy. The lead local flood authority has no objection to those revised plans. So the revised wording of the condition is simply to reflect those amended drainage details. Just to bring to members' attention that there is a supplementary report on this one, which refers to the section 106, changes the recommendation to remove the requirement for a deed of variation to the section 106 because the payment sought by that 106 has been received. So thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Colleen. I'll open up the item to members. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is an industrial estate. The colours are dark, but again, it is quite low as we go along Chemical Lane. Are the officers satisfied with the drainage? Because Chemical Lane, as we get deeper into it, suffers from flooding. and they're all business along there, and it's been a problem for a long, long time. So are you satisfied with this particular planning application that the flooding, the drainage will work and drain that particular part of, it's the start of Chemical Lane from the D Road in a westerly direction, isn't it? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, our officers are satisfied. We've taken the expert advice of the County Council Flood Authority, who have assessed the drainage plans, and they are satisfied that it provides an acceptable drainage solution for the scheme. So they're happy that with the variation of the wording of that condition.
Could I move the application then, please?
Happy to second that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, right. We've had that proposed and seconded by Councillor Williams, seconded by Councillor Fear. Can I see a show of hands, please, in acceptance of that? Unfortunately, Councillor Williams, Jill, you weren't here for the presentation. You won't be allowed to vote. I don't think it makes much difference. I see that as unanimous. Thank you. And this brings us neatly on to agenda item 6. This is applications for financial assistance under historic buildings grants from the Conservation and Heritage Fund for Mare Village Hall and St James's Church Hall, Audley. There's no presentation on that, so I'll open that up to debate.
Happy to move that, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have it moved from Councillor Fear to accept it, and seconded by Councillor Moffat. Can I have a show of hands, please, in support of that? Thank you. That's clearly unanimous. We're getting there. We're nearly there now. Item 7, urgent business. I believe there's one item of urgent business. Would you like to introduce this, please?
Yes, Chair. Members should have in front of them a paper regarding the appeal that 5 Bogs Cottages. The purpose of the report is just to update members. The appeal was scheduled to take place last week on Tuesday. However, unfortunately, the day before the hearing was due, late in the day, the planning inspectorate cancelled or confirmed a cancellation of the hearing following receipt of correspondence from the appellant. Clearly, that was more than unfortunate, and we've subsequently been offered a revised hearing date of the 31st of January 2023. Clearly, we'll be sending a response to that offer, seeking an earlier date for the hearing, and that's the update, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mr. Upton. I'm clearly quite disappointed in this, and the way that our officers here have been treated, particularly when they were asked for an opinion and the decision was made before the opinion was given. So I'd like to, from the chair, formally ask that this Chief Executive Officer, in conjunction with yourself, Jeff, write to PINS expressing our profound disappointment with the way we've been treated in terms of an authority, not mentioning the lateness of the information that came in and the time and preparation that officers have had to give this, not just the key officers, but for those providing information periphery to the appeal. I clearly think that setting a date for next year is completely unacceptable. I don't know how members think about that, but I don't know if members wish to, for the sake of solidarity, want to propose their own letter. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think whether we need to have a separate letter, I don't know. I do think it would be worthwhile to include members' representation in a letter, and it should be a letter of protest. I know from speaking to various people that quite a lot of officers have had quite a lot of their own time wasted by this. We've also, of course, had, I think it's now 5 postponements of this. So really proposing the date that's been proposed, frankly, is quite insulting to the work that's been done by a variety of people in this building. And it really is quite shocking. Could I propose that but maybe we have one letter which makes those points, and that it is signed not just by, as you say, Mr. Upton and the Chief Executive, but maybe certainly by yourself as chairman of this committee, and possibly, if you think it appropriate, myself as the portfolio holder for planning, just to show that it's not just people who work in the building, but elected members who are also really rather fed up with what's going on.
Completely agree with you, Councillor Fear. I'm happy to do that. Councillor Moffat.
Yeah, I support that action. I just want to know whether or not the length of this postponement, which does seem really unreasonable to put it off till next year, is because of some known medical condition. Because if they didn't turn up for health reasons and it was postponed, are officers aware whether or not the length of postponement for a next hearing is because of a substantial health issue, in which case, no matter how much we object, it would kind of come back against us. So, you know, if they had a cold on a day and were a bit poorly, then fine. But do we know of any substantial reason why this length of time has been proposed?
But, yeah. Thank you for that, Councillor Moffat.
Yes, Councillor. Yeah, it's my understanding that the date that's been offered relates to more a process for the planning inspectorate in terms of looking at their resources rather than any sort of imposition or restriction on the appellant. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
So then we have the 2 proposals that the head of planning with the CEO right pins, myself and Councillor Fear as portfolio holder for planning, representing members, write an additional letter. Do we have support of that? Please show with hands, please.
Sorry, Chair, just going back on that very slightly, I think the proposal just...
Yeah, if Mr. Upton, I think he's going to say what I would have said, which is that my proposal was, and I have absolutely no objection to writing 2 letters, but it would seem to me that actually we could write 1 letter making the points, and it seems Mr. Upton is nodding, so I don't think we are going to make any points as members that he would not be comfortable with. That we could write the 1 letter and have it simply signed by the 4 people. Whether that would have greater effect or not, I don't know. If we feel that 2 letters is better than 1, we can do that as well. But I would think we could probably just append all our names onto the 1 protest, could we not?
Happy to go with that. Yeah, I'm happy to go with that. Are members content with that? Nodding of heads, I'll consider that item sent then. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, officers, for your assistance and patience, particularly with the longer item on tonight's agenda. I wish you a safe journey and take care in this heat. And I'll see you again. Thank you very much. Item's now closed.